Welcome to Self-Care for Men. My name is Ed Cardinal, and I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Lukin, who's been a guest of mine before when we talked about self-care for men. He actually wrote an article for Psychology Today. That's how I found Dr. Lukin. He is a clinical psychologist and the co-founder of Lukin Centers for Psychotherapy with multiple locations throughout northern New Jersey. He specializes in men's issues and also a regular contributor to Psychology Today, which is a online resource for mental health issues. Welcome,
Yep.
Dr. Lukin.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again.
One of the things that's been coming up through comments from my followers is the concept of toxic masculinity. So I thought it would be a good thing to talk about, particularly with everything going on in our planet and in our country at this time. So what is toxic masculinity?
So the way I typically think of it, it has three basic tenets, or sort of three basic ideas that it suggests. And one of which is basically suppressing emotion or masking emotion at all costs. I think that's one typical indicator. The second one is a general tendency to maintain hardness. Meaning that you are not showing or considering any sort of internal or external weakness. And lastly, using violence or anger as an indicator of power. So when we want to think about toxic masculinity, we want to be thinking about sort of those three pillars, if you will. And if you notice, when we talk about it, an individual who does have some of this toxic masculinity that people talk about, you'll notice one or most of these tenets are present in that individual.
Why is this happening? Why do we even have that concept of toxic masculinity among men?
Well, as you may know, toxic masculinity, the concept has been around forever.
Right.
It's just now more than ever with, obviously, as you probably know, with the political climate and everything that's going, it's just been brought to the attention more so than before. But this idea has existed for a very long time. It's a sort of, if you think about it, there's an evolutionary kind of basis for some of these actions. And back in the day, the things that I just mentioned were something to emulate, something that was sort of almost like a paragon for what a man is supposed to be. So only in the recent past have we shifted from idealizing something like this to a particular type of an individual that we try to strive to be today.
It seems that it's an obsolete gender role concept that I'm hoping that we can sort of move ahead from. Does a lot of it have to do with socialization? I know you wrote an article about raising healthy boys. Do you think this concept exists because of the way men are socialized?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's socialization obviously plays a huge role in how what we show boys and young men to be. That's what obviously they're going to try to strive for. I also think there is, a biological predisposition, obviously, to have more testosterone, and therefore it plays out in some of these indicators that we talked about. To me, the question isn't, do we want to scratch this completely and start from something new?
Right.
To me, the question is, can we really take apart those three basic tenets and talk more effectively about it? And that's kind of the way I'd like to think of it. It isn't that it's bad or good.
Right.
It's really about how do we become more effective men.
Right.
That's at least the way I want to think about it. And that's the way I would suggest your listeners and your readers to do the same. Really, how do we take apart each thing is this serving us? And I think just from taking a quick look, you'll notice that none of these tenets and none of these sort of pillars are really helpful to us as men. As you probably know, men have more substance abuse issues. They have more anger issues. They're more violent, right? All sorts of different things that are not helpful to us.
Right.
So my hope really is to help individual men specifically to take a look at some of these ideas, take them apart, and really kind of know what you can take away from one of these things.
So it's finding balance too, don't you think? It's like you said, it's addressing some of these challenges that we as men have, talking about them, but also finding healthy ways to find balance and not to be to the extreme with some of these pillars that you're talking about as far as violence, and then
Right.
how it's comes out, like as far as substance abuse, depression, suicide.
Absolutely. There's many studies suggesting that men, for example, show depression or experience depression differently. The symptoms may look anger outbursts or substance abuse rather than your kind of classic "I feel sad." Why do you think that comes up? Really, because if men and boys are not taught to be able to identify and express feelings, they're very less likely to be able to notice them when they're an adult.
Mhm.
So, for instance, certain things that I try to do when I work with men is kind of talk about the first pillar is looking at emotions, right? A lot of men see it as weakness, see it as something to shy away from. The way I'd like to present it is taking a look at it. Is it effective to use some of that information as guidance?
Right.
And a lot of the men that I work with can really relate to that because they overemphasize logic and reason and downplay any emotional input. But emotions are just as important guidance as thoughts. And here's clinicians just in general, not only working with men, we really want to be able to unify the information that you get sort of from your limbic system, which is your emotions, and your prefrontal cortex, which is your thinking. We really want to try to unify it. And that's sort of what I try to focus on when I try to help men identify how they think and most importantly, how they feel.
Mhm. What would be some positive ways when you're raising a boy to allow them to have some of these expression of emotions and to be able to be vulnerable? What would you recommend for someone who's raising boys to help them
Sure.
be healthier?
Sure. Two things that jump to mind. The first thing is just education, like psychoeducation, telling kids, and I know a lot of schools are doing it already. They have classrooms where emotions are sort of listed on somewhere in the blackboard where the child is able to at least identify what they're feeling. So first and foremost, psychoeducation. Feelings exist. These are the types of feelings. This is what it means. Also, boys just as girls have a predisposition to be expressive of what's going on for them. Remember, to your point earlier, socialization is really where, or teaching kids not to express is where that comes in. So the best thing a parent can do is, one, help help the boy identify and learn what emotions are. And two, you fostered by being able to acknowledge when an emotion comes up. Probably the number one question that parents ask me is, well, how do I want to acknowledge or accept the feeling because I don't like the behavior?
Right.
And to me, that's a fundamental mistake that a lot of parents make. I never suggest don't use some sort of consequence for poor behavior. All I'm saying is to say something like, if Billy is throwing something, say, I know you're angry and we don't throw things, right? You just want to connect that an emotion is an emotion and an action is an action. Those two things they seemingly connected, but they're different things. And that's one of the easiest, simplest ways a parent can begin to help to tease apart. You could feel angry, you could feel sad, you could feel scared, you could feel whatever you want to feel. And that's absolutely legitimate because that's the message and the indicator you're getting. And also, let's figure out effective ways that you can act to move forward.
Mm. As you're speaking about this, about raising healthy boys, this is probably what you have to do with raising healthy men, with the men that come to see you. You basically have to educate them about all of these things that they didn't get growing up. So you're basically taking this concept of raising healthy boys and bringing it into your work with
Absolutely.
men.
Absolutely. And to be honest with you, it's a lot harder to work with men because they have so much emotional investment into these kind of three pillars. They believe to be manly, you have to be angry and violent. You have to show hardness and you have to dismiss your emotion. So unlike a child or unlike a boy, which doesn't really come with these preconceived notions, so it's a little easier to steer in the right direction. Men come in and they're bought into this.
Oh yeah.
So it's a lot harder because you have to try to help to disassemble some of those beliefs, understand what are the secondary gains behind believing this, right, and then kind of rebuild. So oftentimes it's a lot harder.
Right. It's more ingrained, and they've been practicing this.
And they believe it. That the hardest part is they believe it.
Right.
It's not even that they've been practicing. It's not like they've done it for 30 years. That they have investment into these tenets. And once you have investment, that's very difficult
Right.
to kind of move away. And that's the biggest challenge often is exactly that.
Mm.
And it is harder. Speaking of one of the pillars about the whole anger violence thing, a lot of men believe they want to use it for control.
Right.
And that's been true for generations. So to try to undo that, it's quite complicated.
Mm. Some of the other things that you mentioned in your article is allowing failure is another one. Encouraging asking for help when necessary.
Right. Failure is very important because to me, it's the only way that you could teach or learn how to be resilient.
Mm-hmm.
Without failure, you can't do it. And that's really true for anybody, but for men specifically, because there's usually netted pressure, like you have to perform really well, very consistently all the time. And if it starts at a young age, you really never learn how to manage failure.
Mm.
And that sounds so simple maybe, but that's an extremely important skill to be able, how do you organize an experience when you fail?
Right.
When that doesn't happen early and happens later in life, that's very difficult. I'm thinking of a client that I had right now, really grew up in an environment where he never experienced failure until 25. Wow. And that was extremely difficult for him once he did, because now he's an adult, right, not knowing how to manage that. And that's, for him, it was extremely difficult. It took us years to kind of get out of that hole because he couldn't reconcile where he's at with the situation that happened.
Mm.
So allowing them to fail, allowing them to do the wrong thing, being able to process what it means to them to kind of course correct is really is one of the best gifts that I think a parent can give a child.
Right. In the asking for help, we as men, we've been taught that that's a sign of weakness, but in fact, it's a sign of strength. Being able to be vulnerable. I think that's an important thing for men to realize, that it's okay to ask for help.
Right, because again, when we're asking for help, it's not suggestive of a particular personality weakness, right? If you think about it, when we ask for help, when we have a larger goal in mind and we need someone or something to get us to that goal, right? Like, so to me, it's such a smooth transition from only relying to yourself to kind of organizing your behavior based on your goal. Well, if you want to get an education, or you want to get a good job, we understand that you need the help of college to get there, right? We don't really say like, well, that's odd. I'm not going to go to college. I'm just going to do this on my own. I mean, we don't really say that, right? We use resources as needed. Emotional resource is literally exactly the same thing. Mm-hmm. And that's important to see, because men ask for help or ask for direction in all sorts of things all the time. Mm-hmm. It's just when it comes to emotions, we're not as good as, because again, going back to the second tenet, that we have to appear hard all the time. We never allow ourselves to tap into that.
Right. You also mentioned about teaching appropriate intimacy. What do you mean by that?
Appropriate intimacy, again, there's so many men that are scared of intimacy because they're not sure if they're able to perform. There's also views on sexuality where there has to be aggressive all the time. Appropriate intimacy is exactly that. It's somebody who's able to be comfortable in their own skin and allowing their partner to be who they are. And as simple as that may sound, actually that's very difficult, because most men either underplayed with anxiety and lack of performance or overplayed with aggression. Getting into that sort of balanced approach is not as easy as it sounds.
Mm-hmm. I would think it's also having that relationship with yourself. That's where it starts. So having that intimacy.
Being grounded.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Being grounded, but to me as a clinician, feeling grounded, meaning that you can identify how you think and feel and what body sensations you have, able to organize that experience, process it, and move forward. Mm-hmm. Right. Because the messages that usually men are taught to not do that, that's why feeling grounded which translates into appropriate, healthy intimacy, usually doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. What would be some ways you would recommend for that grounding that you're talking about, being grounded?
Going back to the basics. Can you identify how you feel? Can you make sense of how you feel? And can you self-soothe appropriately?
Mm-hmm.
If think of alcohol or substances or anything like that, right? It's just a person who is dysregulated, meaning having a hard time managing how they feel and think, and needs something to numb out. Well, let's keep the same idea of trying to regulate how you feel, but just let's try to learn it how to do it productively.
Mm-hmm.
So a person who's able to identify how they feel, identify why they feel that way, understand why they feel, and be able to sit and tolerate it is the more grounded individual.
Mm-hmm.
And you notice that sort of like when people talk about that individual has like gravitas or something like that, right? Or somebody that people want to emulate. You'll notice that these people of strength have that ability to manage how they feel very effectively while speaking or engaging in an activity.
Mm-hmm. I would think that breathing techniques would be a good thing for
That's also true. You could do, I mean, meditation, yoga. There's plenty of other elements that you could help to feel physically grounded. Remember, we experience life through kind of three signals: our thinking signal, our emotion signal, and our body signal. Right? Anything that we could do to cope with and to organize is going to be helpful.
Mm.
So if it's psychoeducation, sometimes that helps. It's processing emotion that sometimes helps. Being in a relaxed state of sort of physical enjoyment, that definitely helps. And as you, I think you speak a lot to that, is how do you actually use your physical organism to get yourself into the best mental state? And there's many studies suggesting that to be the case.
Right. So to wrap things up, any other things that you could add to this concept and what men can do to avoid falling into that trap of toxic masculinity?
Well, first, be open to consider that it's not effective for you. That's usually the way I try to lead in, because taking it apart or suggesting that it's bad, right? I mean, honestly, the name itself, toxic masculinity, already for most men, at least that I work with, already will have a counter argument.
Right.
It's not say this is the way we are, this is that. So it's not even the name itself is already not helpful.
Yes.
Because again, it's going to create a counter argument in the guy's head about like how that doesn't apply to him. That's already a problem. That's already a problem because it makes it harder.
Right.
So first thing to do is to be open. Then that's why I like this neutral word or neutral idea of, is it effective or ineffective?
Right.
Is it effective for you to show hardness all the time? Well, let's look at examples where it is, and let's look at example where it isn't. Right? I'm not suggesting, and a lot of men go to the other extreme, I'm not suggesting weeping in the corner all the time either.
Exactly.
I'm not suggesting not even using some of these indicators at times. For example, firemen who go into the burning building need to be able to show hardness, not to get in touch with their feelings, because if they're going to get in touch with their feelings, how is that going to look like?
Right.
Hey, Bob, I'm really scared going in there. You want to talk about our feelings? It doesn't make any sense, right? Like that doesn't happen, right? We have to actively turn it off to be able to go into the fire, do what we need to do, come back, and maybe then process. So I never suggest let's not do this or have this other anti-toxic or anti-masculine kind of way of being. I never suggest that. All I'm asking people to do is to consider, are some of these elements effective for you? And if people have an open mind, they'll notice that the way that we've been kind of socialized or programmed or suggested is just not helpful.
Right.
There's a lot of intensity and a lot of work, leaves people with very fragile egos because of that. Because like it's literally impossible to maintain the same approach all the time or the same stance all the time of hardness.
Right.
So that's kind of my message is, can you be open to looking at this as effective or ineffective? If a person is able to do that, from my point of view, they're already moving in the right direction.
Right. And as you said, that concept of toxic masculinity has a negative connotation.
Of course. And right, already bought into this idea of needing to be hard, already going to have a negative response to that automatically.
Right.
So I would, if it was me, I would call it something like effective masculinity or ineffective masculinity.
Right.
that has to me a lot more openness to talk about, well, does this work for you?
Right.
And if the man says, yes, it does work for me, then that person is really not ready to do any introspection.
Right. Right. Dr. Lukin, if someone wanted to reach out to you, how could they do so? How could they get in touch with you?
Sure. The best, easiest way is just to give me a call. I still screen all the calls to my practice. You can call 917-903-1901 or go to our website. It's lukincenter.com, Lukin center.com. Those are the two easiest ways. And just if you're on the website, fill out the form and I'll get it right away and be able to respond immediately.
Awesome. And that's one of the nice things that's coming out of this pandemic is you can do a lot of online.
Sure.
I'll be doing a lot of your sessions online.
Absolutely. I would say, me personally, I do about 99% of them online. So that really opens up a lot of, helping people across the United States. So yeah, anytime anybody's interested, either to learn more about the center, maybe talk some things through, or learn anything else that they want to know about masculinity just in general and mental health, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank
All
you
right.
again.
Thank you so much, Ed.
Dr. Lukin. Yeah.
Bye.
And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the subscribe button below, and also comment, like, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And thanks again, Dr. Lukin. I appreciate it. Thank you.